Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Building an Understanding of Family and Community Engagement, a Toolkit of Resources, presented by Dr. Ceri B and Ms. Maria Elena Garcia. This is the first in a series of REL Pacific webinars on family and community engagement. My name is Kirsten Miller. I'm a communications manager at REL Pacific, and I'll be your facilitator today. In just a moment, I'll turn things over to Siri and Maria Elena, but first, let's start out with some tech tips, our agenda and goals for the day, and a little bit of information about the Pacific region. As part of this webinar, we are recording today's session, and we'll make that recording available to you along with these slides. We will be muting everyone to avoid the echo, but you are free to ask questions via the comments and questions box at any time. And please do familiarize yourselves with the control panel tools to the right of your screen. We'll be using those to take questions throughout the webinar and to answer those at the end of the session. Just going to run quickly through our agenda. Right now we're in the Welcome and Pacific Region Context section of our agenda. Again, my name is Kirsten Miller. From there, we will move to the presentation on the Dual Capacity Building Framework for Family School Partnerships with Dr. Ceri B, a Senior Fellow at REL Pacific at McREL. After that, Ms. Maria Elena Garcia, President of ME Educational Consulting, Inc., will present on the Toolkit of Resources for Engaging Parents and Community as Partners in Education, Building an Understanding of Family and Community Engagement, and then we'll do a question and answer session and a quick wrap-up and a survey. Today's objectives are to learn about a framework for establishing and implementing family and community engagement strategies, and to learn about tools that can help you build awareness of how assumptions about family and community engagement can influence your interactions with the families in your schools. Okay, so at the close of the webinar, we will be asking you to complete a short survey to let us know how we've done today, what you liked, what you might like to change, and what you might like to see going forward. That link is on your screen. It's not a live link at this point, but I will be pushing that out to you in the comments box at the end of our session. And I'll also send that link to you in our follow-up materials. Before I hand the microphone over to Dr. Dean, I'd like to share a short introductory video about REL Pacific. If you're not already familiar with the REL program or with our work across the Pacific, this 3-minute feature will provide you with some background on that.
REL Pacific at McREL International is one of 10 regional educational laboratories, often referred to as RELs. The RELs are funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences. We serve education stakeholders in 3 U.S. Pacific territories: American Samoa, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and Guam, as well as 3 nations in free association with the United States: the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Republic of Palau, and the Federated States of Micronesia, which includes the 4 states of Chuuk, Koshrai, Pohnpei, and Yap. We also serve the state of Hawaii. At REL Pacific, we identify priority needs in the region through comprehensive reviews of education system data and reports, ongoing discussions with education agency staff, and continual contact with the field. We also support consortia called research alliances that bring together stakeholders in the Pacific to work collaboratively to address problems and questions of high priority and relevance in the field of education. Our work focuses on 4 priority topic areas: strengthening teacher effectiveness, engaging families and communities in education, ensuring college and career readiness, and optimizing data systems. REL Pacific is housed at McREL International's Pacific Center for Changing the Odds in Honolulu, Hawaii. We are a private, nonprofit organization that draws upon the best of education research to translate what works into culturally conscious innovations that benefit learners throughout the Pacific. The REL Pacific region is geographically vast. The region served by REL Pacific covers 5 time zones and more than 1,000 islands, islets, and atolls. The region is mostly rural and spans a geographic area larger than the entirety of the continental United States. Although all 7 of the major entities served by REL Pacific use English as the language of instruction, 5 of those 7 also instruct in an indigenous language, such as Chamorro, Marshallese, Palauan, Chuukese, Yapese, Pohnpeian, Cochrayan, Samoan, or Hawaiian. For more information on REL Pacific, please visit our website, relpacific.mcrel.org, and sign up for our newsletter for updates on projects, events, and news.
Dr. Ceri Dean is a senior fellow at McREL International. She has extensive experience in school improvement and provides technical assistance and professional development to clients at the local, regional, and national levels and across the Pacific region. She's a former high school mathematics teacher and holds a Ph.D. in curriculum and instruction from the University of Connecticut at Storrs and an MS in atmospheric science from Colorado State University. Dr. Dean is a co-author of the REL Pacific Toolkit of Resources for Engaging Family and Community as Partners in Education. Siri, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my PowerPoint presentation here and hand this over to you.
Thank you, Kirsten, and welcome again to the webinar. It's a pleasure to be with you today to talk about this very important topic. To begin, we'll start with a poll to get a sense of what you would like to learn about family and community engagement. So we'll start with this poll to get a sense of what you would like to learn about family and community engagement. Please enter your answers to the question on the slide in the comments and question box to the right on your screen. And I'll give you a minute or so to answer those, and we'll see where your interests lie. Okay, we're getting a few. We see that a few of you have some questions about how to work with families whose first language is not English, and Maria Elena will address some of that as we proceed with the webinar later. And if we don't get to all of your questions today or your interests, then we have 3 more webinars coming up in the future, and it's likely that we'll address those as we go forward. Okay, give just another few seconds for that. Earlier, our first objective is to learn about a framework for establishing and implementing family and community engagement strategies. Family and community engagement is important for a number of reasons, and one of those is its link to indicators of student achievement. These indicators include classroom grades, achievement test scores, dropout rates, and students' sense of competence and efficacy for learning, as well as their beliefs about the importance of education. In the framework that we're going to talk about and in the toolkit, we speak of partnerships between schools and families where student achievement and school improvement are seen as a shared responsibility. There's mutual trust and respect between school staff and family, and each sees the other as a partner. We've chosen a partnership orientation for our toolkit because it creates the conditions for family engagement to develop and grow. Although there is growing recognition of the importance of family and community engagement, both educators and families lack the capacity they need to form the kind of partnerships that really can support student learning. The dual capacity framework for family and school partnerships is designed to guide the development of family engagement strategies, policies, and programs, and as you see from the first component, to address this important challenge. The framework was developed using the research on effective family engagement in home-school partnership strategies and practices. It also builds on the research about adult learning and motivation and leadership development. Slide, the framework includes 4 components, and I'll talk briefly about those in a few minutes. So the first of those is the challenge, and then we'll talk about opportunity conditions, we'll talk about policy and program goals, and then finally family and staff capacity outcomes. I'll provide a brief overview of each of these in the slides that follow. The first component of the framework is the challenge. And the challenge relates to the idea that there have been a lack of opportunities for school and program staff to build the capacity for partnerships that support student learning. The assumption has been that educators and families possess the skills, the knowledge, the confidence, and the beliefs necessary to develop strong partnerships. In truth, however, principals and teachers receive little training that would help them establish and maintain the kinds of partnerships we're talking about. For families, parents may lack social connections and understanding of the school system that they need to influence actions that would benefit their students. And in some cases, parents have had negative experiences with the education system in the past, and therefore they're hesitant to become involved. Building educators and families' capacity requires a variety of approaches and sustained effort. For educators, this might mean pre-service and in-service professional development. For families, capacity building might take the form of academies, workshops, seminars, and workplace trainings. Capacity building for both might occur as part of integrated parent-teacher partnership activities. The second component of the framework is the opportunity conditions. Opportunities for capacity building must be tailored to the particular context, and you'll hear a lot more about the importance of context when Maria Elena discusses the toolkit. There are 2 types of opportunity conditions. Process conditions, those are conditions that support learning and encourage its application, and organizational conditions that are necessary for implementing and sustaining family engagement initiatives. And I'll talk in a little more detail about each of these coming up. Conditions include the importance of linking to learning. That means that initiatives are aligned with school and district achievement goals and connect families to the teaching and learning goals for students. Conditions mean there's a major focus on building respectful relationships between home and school. And again, you'll hear about the importance of relationships when Maria Elena talks about the toolkit. Developmental process conditions refer to building the intellectual, social, and human capital of stakeholders engaged in the program. Collaborative conditions mean that learning is conducted in group versus individual settings and is focused on building networks and learning communities. So just as we talk about the importance of cooperative learning with students, it's also important when we're talking about the adults involved in the system, whether it's educators or families. Similar to students, it's important that the learning is interactive and that participants are given opportunities to test out and apply new skills. And skill mastery requires coaching and practice, so it's important as you're developing programs that you think about how you're going to provide those process conditions. Organizational conditions refer to the importance of taking a systemic view and designing the core component of educational goals such as school readiness, student achievement, and school turnaround, so that the work around parent and family engagement isn't an isolated initiative, but rather it's embedded into the work that the school is doing. So you'll see that embedded into the structures and processes such as training and professional development, teaching and learning, curriculum, and community collaboration. It's also important that if you are designing a family and school partnership effort, that it operates with adequate resources and infrastructure supports. The third component of the framework is policy and program goals, and these should focus on building family and staff capacity for partnerships. And these include developing capabilities, including human capital, skills, and knowledge. For staff, these capabilities include cultural competency, the ability to build trust, both among their own staff members and with parents. And really important in the context in which we've been working and in the context in which you'll be working is having knowledge of the assets and the knowledge available in the communities where you're working. For families, the capabilities they need include knowledge about student learning, knowledge of the workings of the school system, and skills in advocacy and educational support. And particularly for that last one, that's often something that parents and family members are not, they don't have that skill, they haven't been taught that skill, and if they've had negative experiences before, they may be reluctant to advocate for their students. In connections, those are important relationships and networks. This is how you build social capital. And for cross-cultural networks that are built on trust and respect. And we would like to build family-teacher relationships as well as parent-parent relationships and connections with community agencies and services. So again, as you think about some of those organizational conditions that we talked about, making sure that it is systemic, you're building trust, all of those elements are important to build the kind of capacity that you need for partnerships that support student learning. The third element of this is confidence. So you're trying to build people's individual level of self-efficacy and their level of comfort in engaging with schools, if you're talking about parents, and engaging with parents, if you're talking about educators. Cognition refers to the person's assumptions, beliefs, and worldview. For staff, in order for these to be successful, staff need to believe in the value of partnerships for improving student learning. Families, for their part, need to view themselves as partners and be willing to take on the various roles described in the framework. Trying to advance to the next slide. We're there. Okay, thank you. Once we have built these capabilities, connections, confidence, and cognition, then staff and families can engage in partnerships that support student learning and achievement. Staff who are prepared can take on the roles that we see here. They are able to honor and recognize families' existing knowledge, skill, and forms of engagement. They can create and sustain school and district cultures that welcome, invite, and promote family engagement and development. They also are able to develop and connect all family engagement initiatives to student learning. Families who are prepared can take on a variety of roles. Supporters of their children's learning and development, encouragers of an achievement identity, a positive self-image, and a can-do spirit in their children. So we've heard a lot recently about grit and resilience, and parents can play a great role in helping their children develop a sense of determination and sticking with it even if things get hard. Families can also play the role of monitor of their children's time, behavior, boundaries, and resources. Families serve as models of lifelong learning and enthusiasm for education. They can also be advocates and activists for improved learning opportunities for their children and for their school. They can play a role as decision makers and choosers of educational options for their children, the school, and the community. And lastly, they can be collaborators with school staff and members of the community on issues of school improvement and reform. As Maria Elena provides information about the toolkit, you will recognize how it reflects the dual capacity building framework. Now I'll turn this back to Kirsten so she can introduce Maria Elena.
Thank you, Siri, for that great presentation on the background information and framework. It's my pleasure to next introduce Maria Elena Garcia, President of M.E. Garcia Educational Consulting, Inc. Maria Elena brings more than 35 years experience working at the local, state, and national levels in K-12 systems. Maria Elena holds an MA in Educational Administration and has served as an assistant principal, school improvement director, professional development specialist, and federal projects manager. Since 2007, she has provided technical assistance, systems improvement, professional development, and other support for regional educational laboratory projects administered by McREL, both across the United States and the Pacific region. She is a co-author of the REL Pacific Toolkit of Resources for Engaging Family and Community as Partners in Education. Welcome, Maria Elena, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for a wonderful introduction. Thank you. I appreciate working with Kirsten and Siri. I'm delighted to be here today working with you and our esteemed participants. I'm looking to see where some of you are from, and I see that our some friends from Guam are on. From Hawaii, we have some friends from Texas, Alabama, Iowa, Connecticut, Kansas, and I'm sure there's some others that I've missed. So I'm only sorry we can't all be in the same room to discuss and learn from each other. It would be nice to be in Hawaii or Guam right now where it's nice and warm. I see some of our, the true power is in the conversation with these areas that we'll review. And in the toolkit, we really try to target this particular objective that you see on Objective 2. Our objective today is to learn about tools that can help you build awareness of how assumptions about family and community engagement can influence interactions with families. Well, REL Pacific staff developed a 4-part toolkit in response to a request from the Guam Alliance for Family and Community Engagement. And the members of the Alliance include K-12 school staff and college faculty who work with the schools. And the purpose of the toolkit is to help strengthen partnerships with families and community members in support of student learning. So the toolkit offers school staff an integrated approach, and it brings together research, promising practices, and a wide range of practical tools and resources with explanations and directions for using them. Ceri Dean and myself are co-authors of this toolkit, and in addition we have 2 other authors. We have Dr. Neves Flores from the University of Guam at Cedars, and we also have Dr. Kay Franzi, and she is here at McREL in Denver. Some of the tools today, think about your context and how they would apply. Which is presented in 4 parts, includes information and tools that reflect these 4 areas. Part 1 is building an understanding of family and community engagement, which we will talk about today. It includes the tools that help build a common understanding of what family and community engagement means, and it helps school staff build awareness of how their beliefs and assumptions about family and community engagement influence their interactions with families. The tools in Part 2, building a cultural bridge, which the next 3 are future webinars, by the way, focus on tapping into the strengths of families and community members, and also about helping families to establish active roles within the school community in support of student learning. The tools in Part 3 is all about building trusting relationships with families and community through effective communication. The communication focuses on cross-cultural and two-way communication as ways to enhance family and community engagement. And the tools in Part 4, engaging all in data conversations. Well, this helps staff understand what data is important to share with families and community members, and how to share such data with parents using data conversations. So how can we use the toolkit? Well, the toolkit, each of the 4 parts of the toolkit can be standalones, or the parts can be used all together for a more comprehensive approach. This is all dependent on you and what the needs of the staff and the school community are. Of the toolkit includes an overview and then an introduction to the part with brief explanations of each section and the tools. So each section includes information about a particular topic and one or more topics related to the part. So for example, on part 1, it's called Building and Understanding of Family and Community Engagement, and there's an overview, and then there's 4 sections to part 1. Part 2, Building a Cultural Bridge, has an introduction and it has 2 sections with it. Same for part 3, Building Trusting Relationships with Families through Effective Communication, and part 4, Engaging All in Data Conversations. We have an introduction and then we have 2 sections. So today we're going to look at a few sections of part 1. And unfortunately, I won't be able to go through all the tools with you and have you interact with the tools. My purpose here today is to give you an idea of what those tools are. So enhancing family and community engagement in schools is about building the relationships between the school staff and families and community members. So as in any relationship in your lives or our lives, family and community engagement is about continually building relationships with families and not just, oh, let's do a one-and-done event or random acts of family engagement. It's an ongoing process of meaningful interactions between schools and families, and it involves two-way communication and a purposeful focus on support of student learning. There are specific barriers here that we do from research in the Pacific, and these 4 are not all, it's not an all-inclusive list, of course. We know from research that this would these most likely will be common barriers anywhere. So we selected these specific barriers because they are so interrelated. The information and tools in the toolkit are designed to help school staff overcome these barriers. So for the first one, for example, lack of clear definition of family engagement. Well, there might not be clear definition of or common understanding or a vision amongst the staff and the families of what family engagement is. In terms of cultural barriers, let me give you a few examples. The first that comes to mind for many of us is probably the language differences. Another one is parents' prior or lack of experience with school, whether positive or negative. And it brings in the whole idea of traditional schooling and westernized way of schooling. Also, generational differences in acculturation contribute to cultural barriers as well. Very common in the Pacific are parents that view home and school as very, very separate entities. So there are others, and I'm only going to touch on a few here on the cultural barriers. Also, staff members' own beliefs and assumptions lead to expectations of what family engagement looks like. If the engagement doesn't meet a staff's expectations, we know that a lot of frustration can result from staff. We have probably all heard comments from amazing teachers expressing frustration. For example, they might say, parents don't come to school and they don't seem to care, we can't ever get them here. Well, these comments demonstrate a lack of understanding of stakeholders. It isn't necessarily that parents don't care, because we know that parents care very deeply. Barriers can arise if families have not been exposed to the practices, the experiences, and the beliefs that are validated within the school culture. Parents might be familiar with quote-unquote traditional practices that are so often used and valued in schools, such as parent-teacher conferences, open house, student discipline, or grading practices. So bottom line is our families need help navigating the school system. So you could probably think of other barriers that can be included here, and please think about them as we move forward for your particular context. Building an understanding of family and community engagement of the toolkit has 4 sections. Section 1 is reflecting on beliefs and assumptions. And this section focuses on how one's own beliefs and assumptions influences the willingness and the ability. And the ability here, we are talking about the knowledge to support family and community engagement. Section 2 is getting to know your families. This section focuses on understanding the demographic characteristics of families living on Guam. Although the data is Guam specific, we encourage others to use their own data. Understanding the influence of our cultural lens. Well, the focus of this section is on how cultural influences one's own view of culture and the implications of culture for family and community engagement. There are 2 tools in this section. One tool is designed to increase understanding of one's own value system and behaviors, and another tool increases understanding of different worldviews, collectivism and individualism, for example, and how they affect one's actions. Acknowledging cultural differences, this section focuses on specific barriers to family and community engagement and their relationship to cultural beliefs. Section of the toolkit, what we did is we included a summary of the tools for each section. Here you see an example of all the tools from part 1, building an understanding of family and community engagement. And the table shows you the name of each tool, the tool type, and the group type. And by group type, we mean the group structure, like is it best for individual or small or large group. And participants, is it for staff only or for both staff and parents? These are suggestions from us. You could do whatever you need to for your specific context, by the way. The numbering of the tools helps organize where to find each tool. All of these tools belong to part 1, so they all begin with a number 1. The second number is the section of part 1, and the last number is the tool number in the section. So you can see that section 1 has 3 tools. Section 2 has 1 tool. Section 3 has 2 tools, and section 4 has 1 tool. Now each tool has a cover sheet with these key components. They all have a purpose. They will tell you what the outcomes are, the logistics to consider in terms of what materials you will need, and by the way, all materials that are necessary are included here, and how much time it will take to do this activity or protocol or process. The tool type, is it a protocol, activity, template, process, article, what is it? The group type again, or structure, it's suggested how to deliver, is it an individual, small group, or large group? Again, participants or audience, who is it for, staff or for both parents and staff? And included are, in all the tools, are detailed directions for using the tool and the handouts specific for that particular tool. Of the toolkit, we identified some key points, as in this example of section 1, reflecting on beliefs and assumptions. Let's quickly go over these key points because I want you to see the very important components, the important elements as we go forward. Educators are in a powerful position to influence the nature of family and community engagement, but we must first look to ourselves when engagement doesn't occur. Much of a person's way of thinking and acting are formed by their culture, but individuals within the culture may not be aware of their culture's influence on their interactions with others. So this is true of educators as it is of parents and students. And the beliefs and cultural lens of the educators families encounter shape how families will interact with them. For example, if the educators believe that parents won't support their kids, then they often have lower expectations for the student. If the educator believes that the family is a child's first teacher and that interaction at home fosters achievement, then that belief influences their interactions with families, and it can make families more responsive to the teacher. We're going to do a quick poll right now, and Kirsten is going to lead you through it.
Thank you, Maria Elena. As you can see on the slide here, everyone, we'd like you to think about an example of a belief or assumption that you might have about your students or families and give some thought to, how that might influence your interactions with them. So we're going to give you just a couple of minutes to enter that into the questions and comments box, and we'll take a look here and see if anything is coming up. Just give you a few more minutes here.
Siri, please feel comfortable jumping in if you need to.
Okay, I'm not seeing any comments jumping up just yet. Looks like we have plenty of questions that have come in just throughout the presentation so far that we'll be getting to in the question and answer session. Let me just continue to scroll through here. So parents have limited time. That's a belief or assumption. Parents might not care because they don't show up for events at school. They don't like the way we're teaching. We're teaching mathematics to elementary students. In some cases, communities can feel a little closed, and you have to know someone to open the door to communicate. Let's see if we've got any more here. Educators can assume that their students and families have support systems in place, and perhaps that is not the case. There are assumptions around transportation, difficulty with transportation. We also have a comment here about not being able to understand if they're English language learners. Parents who aren't interested in being involved in school because they come from cultures where the school job is to take care of their children. We touched on that a little earlier. Parents aren't able to support students with their homework. We've got some great comments here. Thank you, everybody, for going ahead and putting those in the questions and comments box. We have a positive assumption. They possess a different kind of expertise than what we typically defer to from experts. So that's a great observation. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we've got a lot of interaction here, and we're going to go ahead and move forward, and maybe we can get to some more of that in the question and answer session.
Some of those are cultural barriers that you listed, certainly. And some of them are the realities of living sometimes when it's socioeconomically maybe. And also some of those were assumptions or beliefs that we might have. So you really have some really good comments there. So we will try and get to as many as possible by the end. But thank you. By the way, I like the positive one. It's always great to see some positive assumptions. And there are some real strengths that our families have that sometimes we may not recognize. In fact, I'll mention one in just a little bit. So we're going to go forward here. And so this is an example of what tools will look like. This is the cover page that I mentioned to you. And since our time is limited, I mentioned that a while ago, I won't be leading you through activities and interacting with the tools. I'm here to give you a quick overview of some of the tools. So here's an example of a cover page describing a tool. And this particular one is tool 1.1.1, thinking about family engagement. So you see it is labeled with key components. It has the name and the number of the tool. It's got the purpose, in this case, to initiate thinking and dialogue about family engagement. The objective would be participants will understand family engagement as a foundation for planning family and community activities. The logistics for you to consider, it talks about needing an organizer for this, and it also talks about suggested time, which is 30 minutes. And the tool type, what kind of an activity is it? Is it template, process, article, chart, or other? And again, the suggested group structure that we suggest. And finally, who is the audience that we're suggesting it for? The next slide, it gives you an example of each tool has detailed directions for use. So it explains the process for that particular tool. So this is what the details these are the directions for the use of the previous tool that I just showed you. This is an example of explanations for tool 1.1.1. Many of the tools lend themselves to adult learning theory. You know, encourages individual thinking and small group and large group conversations between participants, and it focuses in on that the PD that Siri had mentioned prior to within your context. This next slide, most tools have a handout that provides information. This particular one, there's a graphic organizer related to the activity or a set of questions for reflection. In this particular tool, we have a graphic organizer with these 4 key questions. I mentioned that we have key points in each section, and here is a key point at the beginning of section 2, getting to know your families. To build awareness and the common understanding of the importance of data, we included a section of demographics of the broader community in Guam and about the enrollment of the Guam Department of Education schools, because we wanted a common understanding across the board with our participants on what the enrollment is and the students' ethnicities and the languages students speak. Examining the demographic data assists us in tracking patterns such as achievement results by classrooms, schools, and the district among the populations and the subgroups, and increase our understanding of who our families are and helps illuminate some key information to support our intentional planning for strengthening family and community engagement. And although this is the only section specific to Guam demographics, you can substitute your own data. We encourage that. We did not include the 4 different types of data, the perception, the program, the outcome, and academic in this section, because we get into more detail about the various types of data in part 4 when we talk about engaging all in data conversations. Again, here's the cover sheet for investigating demographic data. It tells us the snapshot information about the tool. And again, as I mentioned, we provide specific directions for use, or tool instructions. As you can see, it would include a packet of data handouts. I'll give you about 10 seconds to read that. Related handout for this tool activity in this section is a set of questions for discussion in small groups. Now, these are all relevant to understanding demographics on enrollment and language and various ethnicities and socioeconomic information, all critical when we're working with families. Certainly, we can certainly go deeper with the data, and we encourage that. However, we wanted to familiarize participants and establish a common foundation for them on demographics on the island.
Poll here. I'm just going to jump in and ask this question for you. What can we learn from these types of data that might influence family and community engagement? I will give you just a few seconds to think about that and to post some answers into the comments and questions box to your right. And in the meantime, we actually do still have some I believe some assumptions that had come through between this poll and the last. There were some more great comments around family relationships and culture and languages. But again, the question for this poll is, what can we learn from these types of data that might influence family and community engagement? We've got cultural perspectives of families. We can learn that families live in communities where they cannot access resources. We can learn where we need to focus. That's a great answer. Thank you, Cheryl. Looks like that's all that we've had up so far. Oh, here's one more. We can learn where there are strengths or assets within the community. Thank you, Richard, for that. And also what students might be encountering, in school and outside of school. Might expose disparities between demographic profiles of schools and communities. And an emphasis to emphasize in developing programs, excuse me. So those are some great answers, and those are things that we can also discuss in the questions and answer session at the end. But we will turn this back over to Maria Elena now, and I'm continuing moving along. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Very great answers. Thank you. So as we move along, we're talking about understanding the influence of our cultural lens. Here are some key points for section 1.3. This section is meant to help educators to more effectively interact with families and community members through that have different backgrounds. So key is that people view the world through the lens of culture, and culture being a system of beliefs, of customs and behaviors that are filtered through our experience. And it's important for educators to understand that their own cultural lens may differ from the cultural lens of families within their school, and recognize that those lenses that families have are just equally valuable. This next tool is the cover sheet. This tool is used as an introduction for participants to develop increased cultural awareness of themselves and awareness of understanding of others. We come from the premise of you can't understand someone else unless we truly understand ourselves. So a lot of the tools are self-awareness. So when we have used this tool, participants demonstrated a willingness to share really insightful thoughts in partner groups and during the large debrief. The tools, here's the detailed directions for use. You will note that it begins with individual reflection, with the cultural self-awareness on number 2, and progresses to a pair share, number 3, to a group discussion about new insights gained. There's also a cultural graphic organizer mentioned on number 2. And this next slide is the associated cultural awareness graphic organizer. And, you know, these key questions were so thought-provoking and provided valuable information to participants when we have used them, especially the third question about, gosh, can't see that,
Believe about your culture that is not true. I'm sorry, it is really small type, so I'm going to jump in here. What is one thing people believe about your culture that is not true, and how would you help someone better understand this part of your culture?
Thank you so much. There was a glare hitting the computer too, and I couldn't quite see that. But that was such a thought-provoking question, and there was so much discussion that was sparked when we presented these particular questions, that there was a lot of insights that were made not only on self-awareness about ourselves, but also the population that we serve. So acknowledging cultural differences, again, key points are so important. These are the key points for this particular section. A couple of the key things here are the needs and characteristics of students and families may vary depending on their culture. For immigrant students, often the most recent the migration, the more inexperienced the families will be with classroom and school procedures in the new school system. So support for family and community becomes critical with when families face cultural, language, and economic barriers. So this section provides information and an activity that will help increase understanding of how the varying needs and experiences of families should guide the development of family engagement initiatives and activities, and certainly as part of a school improvement plan. So this next tool uses the cultural iceberg model, and some of you might be really familiar with it, and I will quickly review it. So please note that in an earlier tool, Tool 1.1.2, participants would have already had an opportunity to engage with the iceberg model about to gain more understanding prior to using this particular tool that I'm going to present to you. This tool 1.4.1, exploring cultural influences on traditional family and community engagement. If you look at the outcome, we want participants to be able to describe how deep cultural beliefs impact family participation in quote-unquote traditional family engagement opportunities in schools. The reason I say that is a lot of families are not familiar with parent-teacher conferences or familiar with math nights or reading nights or committees, decision-making committees, or attendance policies or student discipline. So that's why we put traditional in there. And sometimes with parent-teacher conferences, for example, it becomes really quick, rapid fire of information to parents, and it's only a one-way communication. So in this particular tool, we have some details. Here are the directions for the use. The intent is to apply what was learned from the iceberg and discuss influences or beliefs from below the waterline that would impact traditional family involvement practices. Again, traditional in the sense, what we meant is, of course, the open house and discipline and so forth. You see on the directions on numbers 4, 5, and 6 that teams are asked to select 3 possible influencers or behaviors and discuss the impact on family participation. So let's talk a little bit about the iceberg. The concept of culture is used in 2 different tools in part 1, as I said, and it can be powerful when exploring and understanding a culture. It graphically demonstrates the ideas of having both a visible and an invisible structure. The top of the iceberg is supported by the lower part of the iceberg, which is the invisible part. And it's often said the 9/10 of culture is below the waterline. So this lower part is the critical part because it's truly the essence of a culture, and it can lead to challenges for educators, assumptions, or stereotypes if one doesn't pay attention to it. Above the waterline is mostly things we can physically see. They are the elements that we come into contact with first when we are in a new culture. For example, the food, the mode of clothing, the language that is spoken, the celebrations, etc. So when we consider the iceberg concept in our school practices, it helps us to go beyond the superficial elements of a culture. For example, major holidays and specific foods, the mode of dress. In a school, well-intentioned practices like celebrating diversity can easily become holiday units only. So understanding and honoring a culture extends to paying attention to how culture might impact teaching and learning and school interactions within classrooms and with parents as well. So the unspoken rules is partially below the waterline. So let's look at a couple of examples. Let's look at nonverbal communication. This includes not only facial expressions and gestures, it also involves seating arrangements, personal distance, and a sense of time. So in addition, different norms regarding the appropriate degree of assertiveness in communicating can also lead to cultural misunderstanding. For instance, some cultures consider raised voices to be a sign that a fight has started. Well, in my culture, this is not to stereotype, but in my Latino family, this was a sign of an exciting, enthusiastic conversation. It wasn't anything that had to do with anger. So my point being that some cultures might react with greater alarm to allow discussion than would members of a different ethnic group. The unconscious rules that are done automatically, and those carry a really strong emotional load. So a child might come from a home with little verbal interaction. As educators, we know that students need to produce language, and they need to be able to grow to higher levels of academic language by producing language. But if at home they're taught more by observation rather than by verbal ability, well, this can create a really strong emotional load for children as well as for parents that we need to be aware of. So I'm sure we can think of hundreds of examples, but let's move on and see some application of this. This is tool 1.41, and is meant to be used to spark dialogue with colleagues. And I have to say that I'll give you some quick examples of how to use it, but the last thing that I want is to oversimplify or minimize the impact of culture. I do want to point out that as educators, we must avoid the pitfall of thinking that all family characteristics in a culture can be generalized. So instead, we must get to know each family better. So let's say that we're organizing a committee on school safety to help make decisions. Well, we want to ask families or community members to serve as representatives on this committee. Well, if I served on this committee, perhaps 3 beliefs or influences from below the waterline, from the iceberg, that I would consider, that I would pay attention to, would be notions of leadership, attitude toward elders, and patterns of group decision making. And you probably ask, why? Well, I select attitude toward elders within my school context because I know that my work with indigenous cultures, elders are valued for their knowledge and for their wisdom. And it would be disrespectful to be not inclusive of this demographic within this committee. Regarding the notions of leadership, some parents might not feel comfortable on a committee because in their culture the belief is that educators are the authority figures and consequently know more than they do. So often if ethnically diverse parents feel they lack the knowledge and the confidence to operate within the structure of the school community, they may not want to be involved. So I will know that I need to really pay attention to this as I recruit representatives for this committee. And once it begins, really listen and focus on what parents think and dream about to effectively serve and develop partnerships with them. Finally, my third belief or influencer from below the waterline would be patterns of group decision making. By selecting this one, I would consider that some collectivist cultures have values that all adults, such as aunties and uncles and grandmothers and older siblings or an extended member of the family, have influence and responsibility for emotionally supporting the child. So an example of this is in the Chuukese population. It's not unusual for the extended family or another interested community member to come to school functions when a child's parent is not available. So this is a value that Chuukese hold on decision making, and it can be seen as a very strong cultural strength because you talk about a village raising the child. So in organizing this committee, I would consider and welcome a child's pertinent adult. You get an idea of how this tool works. So let's look at this next slide. Here's another one for you to try. This one is on parent-teacher conferences, and based on what you know about deep cultural values in various cultures, which would you consider in parent-teacher conferences from below the waterline?
So Maria Elena just transitioned us into our next and final poll to think about what influences you might put in those blue boxes and what your rationale for that might be. And again, we'd like to ask you to enter your answers into the comments and questions box to your right. I'm just going to back up to that slide so you can take a look at that and have that as kind of a visual as you think about it. We'll head back actually to the iceberg concept of culture figure so that you can take a look at all of those things that are below the waterline there. And I'm just going to jump over to our questions pane and see if we've got anything rolling in here yet. I'll give you just a minute to think about what kinds of influences you might place into those boxes. Okay, I don't see anything coming in yet, but we are actually transitioning into our question and answer session toward the end of the presentation here. We are right at time for that. So we'll start with our question and answer session, and if you come up with anything that you might like to add into that into those boxes in the interim, feel free to go ahead and do that, and we'll see if we can go ahead and circle back to that. going to just forward these slides here. Okay, so questions and feedback. So far, everyone has been really interactive, and we very much appreciate your engagement and in answering our polls and in letting us know what your interests are. We know that, yeah, as Maria Elena said in her introduction, we'd much rather all be in the same room with you so we could sit at a table together and, you know, be able to see reactions and brainstorm. But we do have some time for questions and feedback here now, virtually. We did receive a couple of questions ahead of the event from Angela, so thank you, Angela, for sending those in. We'll start with those, and we'll give everyone else a little bit of time to put some questions in the box. So the first question is, are there any ways that have proven to be effective in engaging parents who are dominant in languages other than English? Also, even if language is not a major barrier, what are some forms of effective engagement that speak to parents from particular cultural backgrounds? So I'm going to turn that over to Siri and Maria Elena to answer that. Of course.
Well, Maria Elena, I think you've talked about a few ways to approach that in your discussion of building trusting relationships with families and two-way communication. And we didn't go into a lot of the strategies that will come up either in part 2 or some of the other parts, but we have talked about the use of translators or other people from the community that can help to either bridge the language barrier or to encourage, to model for other parents that it is safe to participate in school activities. So that might be one way to think about that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Siri. I see that Angela sent in another question as well, and it says, how can parents be engaged who are working multiple jobs and have very little time to be active in their children's school? I think a lot of this, and I think many of you will agree, is there has to be a common understanding across the staff on what is the role that we want for parents. What is the role? But also, parents have to tell you what their role is as well, too. It's not a doing to parents. It's involving them as partners and building that trust so that they're willing to come to school and participate in various activities. So if they have multiple jobs, and I've worked in a school before where parents have shift work and multiple jobs, and it just seemed like we weren't able to catch them at the specific hours, I think we have to define from parent involvement, because from parent engagement, because some parents getting up and sending that child to school every day to us, every single day, or sending them to Saturday school or whatever it might be, that's engagement in itself. And we have to be able to define what engagement is. It's not necessarily being there for every single open house, being there for every single parent conference. It might be that teachers have to call parents, have to call them between hours. We have to be open to scheduling meetings when parents are available. We might not always schedule our meetings at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but we might have to schedule meetings at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night to accommodate parents.
I think, too, when you talked earlier about involving all different members of the community, particularly the elders, that the elders are able to draw other members of the community in. And if we go back to the capacity building framework and we look at the family roles, just as you said, all roles do not require you to have a physical presence in the classroom or in the school. So, for example, they can encourage their students by telling them how important their schoolwork is, as well as telling them how important education is. So it's not just being present in a room, but it's also modeling lifelong learning. So they might read books together, or however education and learning is valued in their culture, to talk about the importance of learning and applying yourself to that learning, helping kids to persevere when things are difficult. for them, and sharing examples of other times when they have persevered and the results of doing that. So again, there are lots of ways to do it other than just being physically at an event.
And Maria, Elena. Kathy had a question about the availability of the toolkit, and that is available online. Kathy, I will go ahead and send out a link with additional resources and with the survey information to everyone at the close of the webinar. We do have another question here. Have we used the toolkit at the college and university level?
We haven't. We've been presenting it in Guam to school staffs. There have been some college faculty on the Research Alliance, and they participated in 2 sessions of the toolkit. And it was interesting because one particular person said, "Why aren't we using this with student teachers especially? This is so valuable to use with student teachers." So we're certainly open to use it at the college level. Sir, go ahead.
No, Kirsten, we received a request.
We did receive a request prior to the webinar for the accessed materials from a professor at Cal State who would like to use these in her classes. So we do have, there's some potential to use this moving forward, and we're really hoping that that takes off. We were excited to get that request from Claudia, I believe was her name, and we'll be providing that information to her after we wrap up here today.
Right, and as we said earlier in the discussion about the framework, that the professional development opportunities for teachers can be both pre-service and in-service. So knowing how little training is provided to principals and teachers, if some of that is started, at least there's awareness raised when they're in pre-service, then they'll feel more self-efficacious. They'll feel more comfortable in their dealings with parents, and they'll have some more strategies for engaging with parents and families once they start teaching.
Mm-hmm. So our next question is when the next parts will be presented in a webinar. So we hope that means that you found this useful today. We are planning to do, I'm hopeful that we'll be doing one a month or so. So if not by the end of February, then the next part will be presented in March if all goes as planned. And then we'll certainly keep all of you posted about when that's going to happen, and we hope you can join us. So the next question is, are you aware of the Affect program developed at the University of Hawaii that was designed specifically for pre-service and in-service teachers?
No.
We're not.
No. So thank you. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Richard. We'll definitely follow up with you after the fact to see if you can give us some more information on that. Let's just see if we've got, it looks like we've got a link, so thank you for that. We will definitely take a look at that and follow up on that after we wrap up here today. So the next question is, I work for a dropout prevention program. It's a question asking for a presentation for their counselors, so we'll follow up on that as well. Thank you for that question. We will follow up with you online, or offline rather, after we wrap up here today.
One of the things that we have found really useful as we're presenting in Guam is it's really caught fire with the counselors, the school counselors. They have really been pushing this because it really focuses on the affective and really promoting and understanding and where the kids and the families are coming from. So it seems very appropriate to school counselors, by the way.
Okay, there's another question. There's another question about accessing the toolkit, and again, I'll be sending out a follow-up email with all of the information that you need on how to access the toolkit and how to access the webinar archive in case you'd like to show it to your colleagues or review it again. So that should come out within, within a week or so. There are a few things that we have to do to get the archive video ready for prime time. That's our last question so far. I'm going to go ahead and push out that live survey link, as I mentioned earlier. And again, we would very much appreciate it if you could fill that out for us to let us know how we did today, what other events you might like to see in the future. We'll go ahead and leave that up for a few minutes so that you can access that. And that will also be in the follow-up email that I send out a little bit later, either later this week or very early next week. And if we have no further questions, we will conclude our session for today. Thank you again so much for joining us and for being so interactive and engaged, and we hope to see you at future REL Pacific webinars.